The silent owner. The dim glow of the chandeliers cast golden reflections across the polished marble floors of La Lumière, one of the most prestigious luxury restaurants in Los Angeles. Nestled in the heart of Beverly Hills, the restaurant had earned its reputation for exclusivity, catering only to the elite, Hollywood's finest, billionaires, and those willing to spend a fortune for an unforgettable dining experience. Among the patrons that evening was Keanu Reeves, dressed in his usual understated style. A simple black blazer, a dark t-shirt, and jeans. He was never one to flaunt his wealth or status. Instead of using celebrity status to demand attention, he preferred blending into the background, appreciating the world as an observer rather than the center of it. Tonight was supposed to be a quiet evening for him, a chance to enjoy a fine meal, reflect on life, and most importantly, check on the restaurant he had quietly owned for the past year. No one, not the staff, not the managers, not even the high-profile customers, knew that Keanu was the true owner of La Lumière. He had purchased it discreetly, not because he wanted to flaunt his wealth, but because he loved the idea of creating a space where people could experience great food, kindness, and warmth. It wasn't about profit, it was about providing an experience. And while the food and atmosphere were impeccable, he had recently received complaints about the manager, Victor Langley, a man who was known for treating staff poorly and showing favoritism to customers based on their status. Tonight, Keanu was here to see for himself. A night of arrogance. As Keanu settled into his seat, he noticed a young couple sitting at a table nearby. They were dressed nicely, but not extravagantly, and their eyes shimmered with excitement. It was clear this was a special night for them, perhaps an anniversary, a celebration, or just a dream come true to dine at such an elite restaurant. A few moments later, Victor Langley, the restaurant's general manager, made his entrance. He was a tall, sharp-dressed man in his mid-40s, radiating arrogance. His slicked-back hair and smug expression made it obvious he carried himself with an air of self-importance. As he walked past Keanu's table, he didn't even glance at him. Instead, he made a beeline for the young couple. "You two, are you sure you're in the right place?" Victor's voice carried across the room. He didn't bother lowering it. Some of the wealthier patrons turned to watch, amused by the scene unfolding. The young woman's face turned red with embarrassment. The man, her partner, cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. We made a reservation." Victor scoffed, looking them up and down. "Are you sure? This isn't some cheap diner. Our meals cost more than most people's rent." Keanu's fingers clenched slightly around the menu. He had heard stories about Victor's elitism before, but seeing it firsthand made his stomach turn. The young man swallowed hard. "We know. We've saved up for months for this evening." Victor smirked. "Saved up? Ah, that's adorable." Keanu could see the hurt in their eyes. The young woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I tell you what," Victor continued, his voice dripping with mock kindness, "I'll let you stay if you can pay up front. People like you tend to be unreliable with payments." Gasps rippled through the room. The young man's hands trembled as he reached into his wallet. Keanu had seen enough. An unexpected intervention. Before the young man could pull out his credit card, Keanu stood up and walked over to their table. He moved with quiet grace, his expression calm but firm. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly, looking at Victor. Victor turned, his face contorting with annoyance. "Sir, I don't believe this concerns you." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his piercing eyes locking onto Victor's. "Actually, it does." The room fell silent. Victor, not recognizing who he was speaking to, sneered. "Are you their sponsor or something? Planning to cover their meal? Because if not, I suggest you sit back down and mind your own business." Keanu smiled, a small, knowing smile. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his black VIP owner's card, and placed it gently on the table. Victor's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "I own this place," Keanu said simply. For a moment, Victor blinked, as if his brain refused to process what he had just heard. And then the realization hit. The Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most respected and beloved actors, a man known for his humility and kindness, was the one standing before him. The blood drained from Victor's face. The murmurs in the restaurant turned into hushed whispers. Keanu continued, his voice never rising, yet carrying the weight of authority. I came here tonight because I wanted to see how things were running. And what I've seen. He glanced at the young couple, his eyes softening before turning back to Victor. Is unacceptable. Victor stammered. Mr. Reeves, I had no idea. That's the problem. Keanu interrupted, his voice unwavering. You didn't know. You assumed. And in your assumptions, you belittled two people who came here to enjoy a night they worked hard for. Victor's throat bobbed as he struggled to find words. Keanu turned to the couple. You're welcome here. As my guests. Order whatever you like. The young woman's eyes welled up with tears. The young man, still in shock, nodded rapidly. Thank you. Thank you so much. Keanu gave them a gentle nod before turning back to Victor. As for you, Victor flinched. You're done here. The words were simple but final. Victor's mouth opened in protest, but Keanu raised a hand. No excuses. No second chances. I can't have someone representing my restaurant who treats people like this. The silence in the room was deafening. Security, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, quickly approached Victor. Without another word, they escorted him out, leaving behind a restaurant filled with stunned guests and an unforgettable moment of justice. A new beginning. After Victor's departure, the atmosphere in La Lumière shifted. The staff, many of whom had suffered under Victor's leadership, breathed a sigh of relief. The guests, inspired by what they had witnessed, clapped in admiration. Keanu returned to his table, motioning for the waiter. Bring a bottle of your finest wine, he said, smiling at the young couple. Tonight is a celebration. The waiter beamed, nodding before hurrying off. As the evening continued, a new energy filled the restaurant, not one built on exclusivity, but on warmth, kindness, and the belief that everyone deserves respect. Little did Keanu know, this night was only the beginning of a much bigger journey. A journey of transformation, redemption, and proving that true success is built not on power, but on how we treat others. Redemption and reflection. The night at La Lumière had shifted in ways no one expected. The air, once thick with tension and arrogance, was now filled with warmth, gratitude, and an unspoken sense of justice. The murmurs of admiration continued to ripple through the dining room long after Victor Langley had been escorted out. For years, his presence had cast a shadow over the restaurant, one that was finally lifted. As Keanu Reeves sat back down, he noticed the nervous yet excited expressions of the young couple he had stood up for. They still looked stunned, as if they were living in a dream. The woman, wiping at the tears of relief in her eyes, looked at him with an expression of disbelief. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. We were ready to leave. Keanu gave her a kind smile, his voice steady yet gentle. You shouldn't have had to feel like that. No one should. The young man, sitting beside her, exhaled sharply. Thank you. I mean, we came here to celebrate our engagement, but for a moment, we felt like we didn't belong. His hand instinctively tightened around his fiancée's. You changed that. You changed everything tonight. Keanu nodded, appreciating their sincerity. He wasn't looking for gratitude. This was just who he was. He believed in kindness, in standing up for people who were often overlooked. He had seen too much injustice in the world to let it slide when it stood before him. As the waiter brought over the finest bottle of wine, pouring it into delicate crystal glasses, Keanu leaned back in his seat, observing the restaurant staff. The waiters moved with a newfound sense of ease, no longer under the oppressive rule of Victor. The head chef, a stout man with years of experience, emerged from the kitchen, glancing around as if seeing the place for the first time. A restaurant wasn't just about food. It was about the experience, about making people feel welcome. And Keanu realized, in that moment, that he hadn't done enough. He had bought La Lumière because he wanted it to be a place of warmth, yet he had let a man like Victor run it without oversight. He had let arrogance fester in its halls while he remained in the shadows. It wasn't enough to own something. You had to nurture it. An unfinished conversation. As the evening progressed, Keanu quietly observed the guests, noticing how differently the staff was treating them now. Without Victor breathing down their necks, there was a lightness in their movements. Laughter trickled from the kitchen. The energy in the room was no longer rigid or cold. It was alive. Yet, amidst the joy, something weighed on his mind. Victor. His fall from power had been swift, and deservedly so, but something about his reaction nagged at Keanu. The arrogance, the smugness, those were the masks of a man used to holding authority. But the fear in his eyes at the moment of dismissal, that was real. What had led Victor to become the person he was? Was he always this way, or had life, in its unpredictable cruelty, hardened him into someone desperate to prove his worth in the worst possible way? Keanu had spent years studying human nature, not just through his acting career, but through his own experiences with loss, struggle, and survival. He knew people were rarely just one thing. Even those who seemed cruel often carried hidden wounds. His instincts told him this wasn't over. A knock at the back entrance, long after most guests had left and the restaurant had settled into its late-night calm. Keanu stepped out into the cool evening air. He had dismissed his driver for the night, choosing instead to walk through the quiet streets, allowing himself time to think. Just as he was about to leave through the back entrance, he heard a shuffling sound near the alleyway. His footsteps halted. Then, a voice. Low, hesitant. Mr. Reeves. Keanu turned slowly, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit alley. And there, standing with slumped shoulders and a lost expression, was Victor Langley. His pristine suit was now wrinkled, his slicked back hair disheveled. His confidence had drained from his face, leaving behind something almost vulnerable. Keanu remained silent, watching him. Victor swallowed hard, then let out a small bitter laugh. "I guess I should have expected that," he muttered. "Losing everything in one night." Keanu didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied the man before him, searching for the truth beneath the arrogance. Victor exhaled, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You're wondering why I'm here," he said, his voice quieter now. I don't know. Habit, maybe. Spent years running this place. I don't know what to do now." Keanu took a slow step forward. "Why did you treat people that way?" Victor flinched. He hadn't expected the question to be so direct. He opened his mouth, then shut it, as if searching for an excuse. But there were none. Finally, he sighed. "Because that's how the world treated me." A beat of silence. Keanu tilted his head slightly, waiting. Victor ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I grew up in a place where respect had to be earned. And the only way to earn it was by being the one in charge. If you weren't at the top, you were nothing. You got ignored, pushed around, forgotten. So I climbed. And when I got to the top," he hesitated, his voice faltering, "I made sure no one forgot me." Keanu's eyes softened. He had seen this before, pain masquerading as power. "Fear doesn't earn respect," Keanu said quietly. "It only isolates you." Victor scoffed, shaking his head. "Maybe, but it kept me in control." Keanu took another step closer. "And where are you now?" Victor fell silent. The truth weighed on him. He had spent so long trying to control everything that he had driven himself into loneliness. "I don't know what to do," Victor admitted at last, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu considered him for a long moment. He could have turned away, left Victor to figure it out on his own. But that wasn't who he was. "You have two choices," Keanu said, his voice calm yet firm. You can walk away and keep blaming the world for the way things turned out. Or, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You can start over. Learn. Change. Victor looked up, his expression unreadable. I fired you because of the way you treated people, Keanu continued. Not because I wanted to destroy you, but respect has to be earned the right way. A flicker of something passed through Victor's eyes, something like hope. For the first time in years, someone had given him a choice. And that choice would determine everything. The weight of change. Victor Langley stood in the dimly lit alley behind La Lumière, his breath uneven as the night's cold air wrapped around him. The weight of Keanu Reeves' words still echoed in his mind, pressing down on him like an invisible force. He had spent years believing that power demanded cruelty, that people only respected those who could keep them under control. But tonight, he had lost everything, not just his position, but the identity he had spent a lifetime building. And yet Keanu had given him something unexpected. A choice. The words had been simple, but their meaning was profound. He could walk away, let his anger consume him, and convince himself that the world was unfair. Or he could do something he had never considered before, change. But could he? Was it even possible for someone like him to rewrite the way they saw the world? He didn't know. But for the first time in years, he was willing to find out. A broken foundation. The following morning, Victor woke up in his modest apartment, a stark contrast to the luxury he once surrounded himself with. The silence in the room was deafening. No morning calls demanding his attention, no high-end suits lined up for the day, no staff awaiting his orders. Just him. Alone. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. His mind was a battlefield, warring between pride and the aching realization that he had done this to himself. He had pushed people away. He had ruled with intimidation, ensuring that no one got close enough to see the emptiness beneath the arrogance. And now he was nothing more than a man staring at his own reflection, questioning everything. He had no job, no reputation to uphold, nothing. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe it was a starting point, an unexpected opportunity. For the first time in years, Victor found himself walking through the streets of Los Angeles with no destination. No luxury car, no assistance, just him, his thoughts, and a growing awareness of the world he had ignored for so long. He passed by small family-run restaurants, where owners greeted customers by name, laughing and chatting like they were old friends. He walked past street musicians, pouring their souls into their music, earning smiles from passers-by. He even noticed a small bakery where the owner handed a loaf of bread to a homeless man without expecting payment. This wasn't his world, the one built on status and exclusivity. But as he watched, he realized something shocking. These people seemed happy. Not because they had power, not because they were feared, but because they belonged to something greater than themselves. A pang of regret settled in his chest. How many people had he denied this simple joy? How many customers had walked away from La Lumière feeling unworthy, simply because he had decided they didn't fit his definition of importance? His stomach turned. He needed to do something, but where did he even start? As if fate had been waiting for the right moment, his phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello. A familiar voice responded. Victor, it's Keanu. A long silence stretched between them. Victor swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. Should he apologize? Should he pretend he had everything figured out? Before he could speak, Keanu's voice broke through his hesitation. Meet me at the restaurant. We need to talk. Victor's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure what Keanu had in mind. But whatever it was, he wasn't about to ignore the one man who had given him a chance when no one else would. Facing the past, Victor arrived at La Lumière, a place that had once been his kingdom, but now felt foreign, like a museum of his past mistakes. He hesitated at the entrance, half expecting the staff to turn him away. But to his surprise, no one did. Instead, they watched. Some with curiosity, others with caution, a few with something resembling hope. He had ruled over them with fear, yet here they were, still willing to see what would happen next. Keanu stood near the bar, dressed in his usual understated fashion, completely unfazed by the tension in the room. Victor approached cautiously. "You called me." Keanu nodded. "You showed up." A small, knowing silence passed between them. Then, Keanu gestured to an empty chair. "Sit." Victor obeyed, unsure of what to expect. Keanu leaned forward, folding his hands. His voice was calm, yet deliberate. "You want a second chance." Victor clenched his jaw, his pride warring with the truth inside him. He could lie, pretend he had everything under control. But something about the way Keanu looked at him made it impossible. "Yes," Victor admitted, the first honest answer he had given in years. Keanu studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then earn it." Victor frowned. "How?" Keanu's next words hit like a hammer. "You're going to start at the bottom." Victor stiffened. "What?" Keanu didn't waver. "If you want to prove you've changed, you're going to do it the right way. You're not walking back in here as a manager. You're going to work. Clean tables. Take orders. Learn the names of the people you used to ignore." Victor's pride flared up in protest. Him. Cleaning tables. Serving people he once commanded. But then he thought about the silence of his apartment. The aimless wandering through the streets. The kindness he had witnessed in strangers who had nothing, yet gave everything. This wasn't punishment. It was a chance to rebuild himself from the ground up. And deep down, he knew Keanu was right. A slow exhale escaped him as he met Keanu's gaze. "When do I start?" Keanu smiled, the smallest sign of approval. "Tomorrow." Victor nodded. "Tomorrow, then." A new beginning. One where he wouldn't lead through fear, but learn through humility. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing power. He was chasing something real. And that made all the difference. The test of humility. Victor Langley had spent years building an empire of fear. He had ruled with intimidation, demanded perfection, and crushed anyone who didn't fit his version of success. But now, as he stepped into La Lumière the next morning, not as a manager, but as a low-level employee, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Humility. The uniform felt unfamiliar on his body. The crisp white shirt, the black apron tied neatly around his waist. It was a stark contrast to the designer suits he used to wear as he barked orders. Now he wasn't standing in the manager's office, dictating policies and deciding who was worthy of dining here. Now he was on the floor, and everyone was watching. A different perspective. The moment he stepped into the main dining area, the whispers began. The staff, many of whom had endured his cruelty, stole glances at him, their expressions ranging from skepticism to outright disbelief. He couldn't blame them. To them, he wasn't just some ex-boss trying to make amends. He was the man who had once belittled them, judged them, made their lives miserable. And now he was one of them. Somewhere in the back of the restaurant, a chuckle rang out. "Well, well," a voice muttered. "Didn't think I'd see the day." Victor turned to find Louis, one of the senior waiters, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. Louis had been working at La Lumière for years, enduring Victor's harsh management and unfair policies. He had been one of the few who stood up to Victor whenever he mistreated the staff. And now, Louis was his co-worker. "First task of the day," Louis said, tossing a damp rag toward Victor, who barely caught it in time. "Tables need wiping. And don't half-ass it." Victor stared at the rag in his hands, his stomach tightening. This was beneath him. He had spent years giving orders, not taking them. His pride burned inside him, screaming at him to walk out, to prove he didn't belong here. But then he remembered Keanu's words. "If you want to prove you've changed, start at the bottom." Swallowing hard, Victor took a deep breath and stepped toward the nearest table. The rag felt strange in his hands, the action of cleaning so foreign. He had walked past hundreds of these tables in the past, never once considering the effort it took to keep them spotless. But now, as he wiped down the surface, he realized something unsettling. This was work, real work, and it was far harder than he had ever given it credit for. Learning through struggle. The hours passed slowly. Victor did everything he had once thought was insignificant, clearing plates, refilling glasses, even handling the complaints of customers who looked at him the same way he had once looked at others, with judgment. By noon, sweat gathered at the collar of his uniform. His arms ached from carrying trays. His patience was tested by demanding customers, and the worst part, no one respected him. He had assumed that humbling himself would earn him immediate forgiveness, that people would see his efforts and applaud him for trying. But the staff wasn't ready to forgive. They spoke to him in clipped tones. Some refused to meet his gaze. Others treated him as if he were invisible, exactly how he had treated them. It stung, more than he expected. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this was the lesson he had never learned. Respect wasn't given. It was earned. And he had a long way to go. The breaking point. By the time the evening rush arrived, Victor was on the verge of collapse. His body wasn't used to this level of physical labor, and his mind wasn't used to the constant humility. Then came the moment that nearly broke him. A high-profile guest had arrived. A well-dressed man, clearly from money. Someone who had probably been here countless times before. He snapped his fingers at Victor the moment he sat down. "Waiter," the man said sharply, not even looking up from his phone. "I don't want tap water. Bring me imported." Victor inhaled, nodding. "Of course, sir." The man didn't acknowledge him. Victor turned toward the kitchen, but just as he did, he heard the man mutter, "They'll hire anyone these days." The words cut deeper than they should have. For years, he had been the one making such remarks. He had looked at people the same way this man looked at him now, with entitlement, with disdain. Now he was on the receiving end of it. A cold chill ran through him. Is this how I made people feel? The thought alone was enough to make his stomach churn. For the first time, he truly understood. A small gesture, a big impact. Victor didn't quit that night. He wanted to, but something deep inside told him that this was part of the process. After the rush died down, he found himself standing near the kitchen, exhausted. Louis approached, arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. "You didn't walk out," Louis muttered. Victor shook his head. "No." A slow nod. "Good." Then, something unexpected happened. Louis slid a bottle of water toward him. Not as a demand, not as an order, but as a simple, unspoken gesture of acknowledgement. Victor stared at the bottle for a moment before taking it. "Thanks." It wasn't a grand moment. No speech, no dramatic forgiveness. But in that small act, Victor saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, people were starting to see that he was serious. That he wasn't just playing a role, he was trying. And that meant everything. The true test of change. The days blurred into weeks. Every morning, Victor Langley woke up to an unfamiliar reality. One where he wasn't in charge, where no one deferred to him, where his past reputation carried no weight. His hands, once accustomed to signing contracts and gesturing commands, were now calloused from scrubbing tables, carrying trays, and enduring the silent judgment of the very people he had once mistreated. At first, it had felt unbearable. The whispered comments, the skeptical looks, the quiet resentment, it was suffocating. He had spent his entire life demanding respect, but now he realized the ugly truth. He had never truly earned it. But something had shifted in him. Because despite the exhaustion, despite the humiliation, despite every instinct screaming at him to quit, he stayed, breaking the cycle. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with the usual energy of high-end clientele, Victor was busy setting a table when he overheard two young waiters whispering nearby. "He's really still here," one of them muttered, glancing in Victor's direction. The other scoffed, probably trying to prove something. No way he lasts much longer. Victor didn't react. He didn't need to. Because now, he understood something that had eluded him for years. Respect wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving yourself right. And for the first time in his life, he was doing this for himself. Not to impress, not to manipulate, not to climb back to power. But because he knew, deep down, that if he didn't change for real, he would spend the rest of his life as an empty man in an expensive suit. The night everything changed. The evening rush had just begun when Keanu Reeves walked into the restaurant. Unlike the celebrities who often dined at La Lumière, Keanu didn't demand special treatment. He greeted the staff warmly, smiled at the chefs, and took a quiet corner seat without any fanfare. Victor, now accustomed to his role, instinctively stepped forward to serve him, but hesitated. This wasn't just any customer. This was the man who had given him a second chance. A moment passed, then Keanu raised a brow and chuckled. "I don't bite, Victor." Victor exhaled, shaking off the nerves. He approached the table, standing upright, as he held his notepad. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to La Lumière." Keanu smiled, amused. "Nice delivery." Victor allowed a small smirk. "Still working on it." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "How's it been?" Victor hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wasn't used to being honest about his struggles. Finally, he sighed. "Harder than I thought. But different. I see things now I never saw before." Keanu nodded, studying him with a kind of quiet understanding that made Victor feel seen. Then, before Victor could continue, chaos erupted from the other side of the restaurant. A loud, furious voice cut through the elegant atmosphere like a blade. "This is unacceptable. Do you even know who I am?" Heads turned. Guests murmured. The staff tensed. Victor turned to see the source of the outburst, a wealthy businessman, his face red with rage, berating a young waitress. The girl, barely in her early 20s, stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched a tray. Victor's stomach tightened, because he had seen this scene before, not as an observer, but as the man on the other side of it, and he knew exactly how it felt to be the one standing there, spitting venom, tearing someone down just to feel powerful. He had done it so many times. But now he saw the moment for what it really was. Cruel, unnecessary, ugly. The old Victor would have ignored it, or worse, encouraged it. But he wasn't that man anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. The moment of truth. Before he could think twice, Victor moved. With steady steps, he crossed the restaurant and positioned himself between the furious businessman and the waitress, his voice calm but unwavering. "Sir, is there a problem?" The man's eyes snapped toward him, his fury doubling. "Who the hell are you?" Victor didn't flinch. "Just someone who works here." The businessman scoffed, looking him up and down. "Then you should know better than to interrupt a paying customer." He pointed at the waitress. "She spilled water on my suit. Do you know how much this costs?" Victor glanced at the girl. Her face was pale, her lips pressed together in fear. He knew that look. He had caused that look in others. But not tonight. Tonight, he was going to break the cycle. Taking a breath, he turned back to the businessman. "I understand, sir. Accidents happen, and we'll be happy to cover the cleaning cost. But I won't allow you to yell at my staff." The businessman blinked. He wasn't expecting that. Victor continued, his voice steady. "She's here to serve, not to be humiliated. If you have a problem, I'll handle it. But you will speak to her with respect." The businessman's expression twisted with outrage. "This is ridiculous. I'll have your job for this." Victor smirked, his voice utterly calm. Already lost one, not afraid to lose another. The restaurant was dead silent. For the first time, Victor wasn't using power as a weapon. He was using it to protect. And then, just when the businessman opened his mouth for another tirade, A slow, measured clap echoed through the restaurant. Victor turned to see Keanu Reeves, grinning from his seat, applauding. The businessman paled. He had just tried to intimidate someone in front of Keanu Reeves. Realizing he had lost the room, the businessman grabbed his coat and stormed out, muttering under his breath. Victor turned back to the waitress. "You okay?" She nodded quickly, still shaken, but relief shone in her eyes. "Thank you." He smiled, nodding once. "Get back to work. You're doing fine." And just like that, the moment passed. But something in Victor had changed forever. He hadn't just defended her. He had finally stood against the man he used to be. And this time he won. A new chapter begins. Later that night, as the restaurant emptied, Victor sat at the bar, processing everything. Keanu slid onto the stool beside him, nodding in quiet approval. "That," Keanu said, "was your real test." Victor exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "Felt different." Keanu smiled. "That's because it was real." A pause. Then Keanu set a key on the counter. Victor frowned. "What's this?" Keanu leaned forward. "A choice." Victor stared at the key, recognizing it instantly. It was the key to the manager's office. His old office. Keanu's voice was quiet but firm. "You've earned a second chance. If you want it." Victor swallowed hard. A few weeks ago, he would have grabbed the key without hesitation, desperate to reclaim his power. But now he knew what truly mattered. This wasn't about power. This was about becoming the kind of man who deserved it. And this time, he would. Slowly, Victor reached for the key. The legacy of change. Victor Langley sat in silence, the key to the manager's office resting in his palm. The weight of it wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. For years, power had been something he clung to out of fear, control, and arrogance. It had been a tool to manipulate, to dominate. But now, sitting across from Keanu Reeves in the quiet glow of La Lumière's closing hours, he felt something foreign yet profoundly different. Responsibility. This wasn't just about reclaiming a title. It was about proving, to himself, to the staff, to the world, that he could do it differently. Keanu's steady gaze never wavered. He wasn't forcing the decision. He was simply offering it. Victor exhaled, staring at the key. "What if I mess it up again?" Keanu smiled. "Then you learn. Again. And again. Until you get it right." Victor smirked, shaking his head. "Not exactly the motivational speech I was expecting." Keanu chuckled. "You don't need motivation. You just need to decide who you want to be." Victor stared at the key for another long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate breath, he closed his fist around it. The first day as a new man. Stepping into the manager's office, the next morning felt surreal. Everything was exactly as he had left it weeks ago. The dark wood desk, the perfectly organized files, the panoramic window overlooking the dining floor. Except he wasn't the same man who had sat behind this desk before. The first thing he did was remove the "employees must be perfect" sign he had once proudly displayed. He tossed it into the trash. Then he called for a staff meeting. The employees filed in cautiously, some exchanging glances. They weren't sure what to expect. Victor stood at the front, hands in his pockets. He took a deep breath, not commanding, not intimidating, just speaking. "I owe you all an apology," he began, his voice even. "I spent years running this place the wrong way. I treated people as if they weren't good enough. I built this restaurant on exclusivity and fear instead of excellence and respect. And because of that, I lost something more important than my job. I lost your trust." The room remained still. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did," he continued, "but I am asking for a chance to prove to you that I can be different." Silence. Then Louis, one of his harshest critics, crossed his arms. "So, what? You expect us to just believe you changed overnight?" Victor shook his head. "No." He met Louis' gaze with steady honesty. "I expect to earn it. one day at a time. A pause. Then, to his surprise, Louis nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't immediate acceptance. But it was a start. Redefining leadership. Over the next few weeks, Victor led differently. He didn't micromanage. He listened. He learned the names of every staff member, asked about their families, and even helped in the kitchen when things got overwhelming. Most of all, he treated everyone with respect, from the dishwashers to the VIP guests. Word spread. La Lumière was changing, not just in reputation, but in culture. One evening, Keanu returned, this time not as an observer, but as a friend. He watched as Victor walked across the floor, stopping to greet a young couple dining for the first time. There was no arrogance, no superiority, just genuine hospitality. When Victor finally approached Keanu's table, there was a spark of something Keanu hadn't seen before. Peace. Victor smirked. Don't tell me you're here to test me again. Keanu grinned. Not this time. He gestured around. You've already passed. Victor glanced around the restaurant, watching as staff moved confidently, customers dined happily, and the place felt different. Better. I guess I did, he murmured, almost to himself. Keanu leaned back in his chair. So, what's next for you? Victor smiled. A real, unforced, honest smile. I build something worth remembering. And this time, it wouldn't be built on power or fear. It would be built on respect, kindness, and second chances. For the first time in his life, Victor Langley had finally won. Not over others, but over himself.